So today we begin our question of elective cosmetic surgery. So let's just lay out what we're going to do. So we're going to look at two Teshuvos. Tonight we'll look at one. I hope we finish it tonight. And next week we'll look at the other Teshuva. And tonight's Teshuva, the Tzitz Eliezer, Rabbi Waldenberg is going to forbid it. He's going to say it's forbidden to do elective cosmetic surgery. We're going to learn, right? And Rabbi Feinstein next week we'll see is permissive. Now they're going to come at it from two different angles. But let's first just qualify what we mean by elective cosmetic surgery, just so that we know what we're talking about. I already said earlier that just because there's recordings on, my rule with recordings is we still behave normal. So argue, make your points, don't worry about the recording. It's just there's some doctors who asked me to record for this, so I'm going to. But after this series, we're going to go back to regular Teshuvos of non-recorded. So just for the for this question of cosmetic surgery, we're going to record. Yeah. Especially since tonight we're going to get into the role of doctors in general in Torah, which is going to be an interesting question. Wow. So first of all, let's just qualify what elective cosmetic surgery means. Elective cosmetic surgery means that there's no medical benefit. If there's any medical benefit, we have a clear instruction. For medicine, we follow what doctors say to do. And if for whatever medical reason some sort of cosmetic surgery is necessary, then do it. Now, I would venture to say that a psychological reason would also count as this. To give a simple example, I don't mean someone who says, I have low self-esteem and I need to fix my cheekbones. I don't know that. I'm not necessarily going to qualify that as a psychological issue. If that's the psychological issue, which I'm sure some people have, then they should probably see a therapist before they see a cosmetic surgeon. Just my humble opinion. What I mean by cosmetic surgery that's psychological in nature is, God forbid, someone who had an accident. So they're healed, technically. So they went through the healing. And their face is completely deformed. That's a different story. The person wants cosmetic surgery to go back to the way he used to look, or at least something like that. If not, the man's scarred for life. That I would venture to say counts as a medical reason. I haven't seen it written. That makes sense. I haven't seen it written, but I would venture to say that that's considered a medical reason. Over here we're talking about simply for the sake of looks. Setu. That's the only value that this person is looking for.
So we haven't even started yet. What you're saying is, if I understand correctly, the implication is, for that reason, or those reasons, it would be not looked upon positively.
If it's for what? If it's simply for
cosmetic.
Okay, so that's going to be a dispute. Tonight's conclusion is going to be no.
Medical, everyone would agree. Right.
That's right. So I'm suggesting that medical would include psychological medical.
Yeah, but psychological, my eyelids don't look so good. Is that
okay? That's what I'm saying.
Okay, fine.
Deformed, yes, I understand you have a crash.
Okay, we'll see. We're going to get into some of that. We'll get.
You know that I do this all day.
Of course. So I have a niece. I have a niece who was born with cleft palate. They did cosmetic surgery to fix it. Nothing unhealthy. Nothing unhealthy. But this is a girl grows up with a cleft palate like that.
To me, that's purely medical.
That's medical, exactly. Even though technically speaking, the body's functioning normal, but that we would call medical. So I
do this all day, right? I'm not only dealing with emergencies, which are pure health.
But you're doing some.
90% of what I do is because people don't like what it looks.
The teeth.
Hello,
Okay, so then. Okay, so
I'm looking at a color to make sure that matches perfect.
So let's see.
I don't get paid.
So let's see. So let's see. So again, so let's see the. No, I'm with you. I'm with you here, and I think you're right. It's a very valid point. So I'm just giving you the layout of what's going to happen tonight. Rabbi Waldenberg is going to say no. Next week, Rabbi Feinstein is going to say yes. And when you hear their arguments, you're going to understand the context in which they're saying these things. And it's quite possible that when we think of the context in which they're arguing and the way they frame their arguments, they're not necessarily arguing at all. They're just coming at it from different angles and under different circumstances. So let's see. But I'm just giving you, this is the layout. So the reality is that many, if not most, would rely on Rabbi Feinstein. He says you're allowed to. But I'm just telling you the two angles we're going to come. So just forewarning, tonight the answer is going to be no, and next week, God willing, from Rabbi Feinstein, the answer is going to be yes, you may.
So I'll come back next week.
Yeah, but it's still important. It's still important to hear his argument. Yeah, so it's still important to hear. It's still important to hear his arguments.
Also, because she's
yeah. Whichever side of the fence we fall on, it's still important to hear these arguments because we're going to learn much more than just the question of cosmetic surgery, as we have always. And as soon as you learn Teshuvos and you open up sources, you learn all kinds of other things. And so here's the two angles. Tonight, the Rabbi Waldenberg, the Tzitz Eliezer, is going to come from the question of what is the doctor's role in Torah, right? We're going to discuss sources on the fact that doctors are encouraged by Torah law to practice medicine. And the question is the context in which they are encouraged to do so. And essentially what Rabbi Waldenberg is going to argue is you've been mandated as a doctor to heal. And if it's beyond the purview of healing, what are you doing it for? Now, Rabbi Feinstein is going to come in from a completely different angle. He's going to come at it from an angle of there's a prohibition against inflicting pain upon one's body. And he's going to go into a whole back and forth of the pain you go through versus the gain you have at the end of the surgery. That's what he's going to get into. So they're coming at it from different angles. Understand? Tonight we're going to come from what's the limitations on the role of a doctor, if there are any, and then the angle from Rabbi Feinstein is going to be questions of like the value of the gain of the surgery versus the pain of the surgery.
But what you're saying tonight is, how does that affect the patient himself? You're saying mitzad the.
Are you allowed to go? So yeah, are you allowed to go to the doctor and do that?
What's mitzad the patient?
Are you allowed to go? As a patient allowed to go to the doctor to ask for surgery? You're not allowed to
You
take.
might be not allowed to the doctor, but doesn't mean the patient is not allowed to.
You're not allowed to inflict pain upon yourself either. You're not allowed to inflict pain. Oh. Okay, let's see. Let's see. Yeah, let's see. Okay, maybe it will be addressed. Let's see. Let's see.
You're saying it's only on the doctor, not on the patient?
He says specifically both.
That's right.
We're going to see.
If he brings it on the doctor.
Okay, let's get into it because there's a lot to cover, and I hope to finish this tshuva tonight. So let's get into it. So let's begin first of all. Let's begin with the source sheet here.
There should be 100 people in here for this.
Let's see the source sheet here.
They don't want to know.
Let's see the source sheet here, and we're going to begin with some background on the Gemara and our sages' words as they speak to the role of a doctor. So let's begin with the Gemara. This Gemara, the main line of the Gemara is quoted in two places in the Gemara, one here in Brachas, which is what we're learning, because you're going to see some interesting background, and there's another line that's important, and it's as well cited again in the Gemara in Baba Kama, in a different context. Let's see. The Gemara relates, this is from Brachas 60a. Rabbi Abahu entered a bathhouse. When the bathhouse floor collapsed beneath him, and a miracle transpired on his behalf, he stood on a pillar and saved 101 men with one arm. This is the miracle. He held one or two people in his arm, with others holding on them, and so on, so that all were saved. People were hanging on to each other. He said, this is confirmation of the statement of Rab Acha, who said that one should offer thanks upon leaving the bathhouse safely. So you see, I had this miracle in the bathhouse. Okay. For Rab Acha said, one who enters to let blood, so letting blood is an ancient medical treatment, right? The body regenerates blood. So what they used to do is, if a person had, I think even fever they used to do this for, but if they felt, or the doctors at the time believed that the person has some sort of infection in the blood, I don't know if they had the word infection, but something was wrong with the blood, they would literally, it's common practice, they would literally cut the skin. Leeches even today leeches, because leeches take out specifically negative blood, right? That's a little different. This is just they would let blood flow out of the body, the person would get weak, he would lie down for a day or two, his body would generate blood, and the idea was the new regenerated blood would be healthier. And this is a common practice. People used to do it even if they were healthy. They would do it once a year or something like that. That's what seems like from the Gemara. It's called bloodletting. Huh?
Middle Rebbe's story, the whole thing with Shmuel Mumkis.
With bloodletting?
The whole marshal, yeah, there's a whole story with that.
Okay,
Wait,
so
is this story in the Gemara?
we're reading from the Gemara now.
I know, but is this story from the Gemara where Asher Yetzer comes from?
No. Actually, maybe it's in this section of the Gemara, I don't know.
Bathhouse.
What we need to
Bathhouse, not bathroom. Bathhouse as in shower.
Oh.
No one had showers in their own houses, so you would go to a central spa.
When you go down,
What do we need the whole first part for?
You don't need, it's just context. Let's see. We're going to see. The main thing is the next part of the Gemara. Okay, let's see.
But much more fancy.
That's fire.
Okay, so Rav Acha said, this is the main part of the Gemara. One who enters to let blood says, may it be your will, he's talking to God, may it be your will, O Lord my God, that this enterprise be for healing and that you should heal me. As you are a faithful God of healing, and your healing is truth, because it is not the way of people to heal, but they have become accustomed. So Rav Acha is saying that people should not practice medicine as they lack the ability to heal. It's God who heals. Rather, healing should be left to God. So the blessing you're saying is, let this enterprise do healing, please. Let this enterprise somehow bring upon your healing, dear God, because humans don't know how to heal. Whatever, we got used to going to doctors, so we're going to do it. That's what Rav Acha seems to be saying. Now Abaye responded and said, one should not say this, and it is taught in the school of Rabbi Shmuel, that from the verse which reads, and shall cause him to be thoroughly healed, right? This is Verape Yerape. This is the pasuk. This pasuk is referring to a person, the laws of suing. You, what's the word when you inflict physical harm on someone? What's the assault? You assault somebody else, and the Torah says, pay the doctor bills. Here translated as, and shall cause him to be thoroughly healed. V'rape means pay for the doctor bills. So from the fact that the Torah commands to pay for the doctor bills, from here we derive, explains the Rabbi Shmuel, that permission is granted to doctor to heal. So the practice of medicine is in accord with the will of God. So as for bloodletting, the Gemara asks, when one stands after having let blood, what does he say? So Rav Acha said, he recites in gratitude, blessed be he who heals without payment. And God heals. Because Rav Acha is of the opinion that God does the healing, not the doctor. Okay, so we have already here a dispute between Rav Acha and Abaye, Rabbi Shmuel, and the Gemara rules in according to Rabbi Shmuel that doctors have been granted permission to heal. Now the language is strange or peculiar, because the language in the Gemara is not that thou shall heal, but permission is granted to the doctor to heal. So what exactly does this mean, permission is granted? Does that mean really we hope the doctors shouldn't have to heal, but now, okay, they have to heal, let them go heal. That's what it sounds like, right? We're not done yet, so don't get angry yet. I'm just pointing out.
What we say in the morning, that Hashem creates them as his messengers.
So you're already learning after 1,000 conclusions. We're starting from the beginning now, right? Yeah?
Okay.
The permission is granted by whom?
By the Torah.
Torah says you can do the work.
Torah says you shall pay for the doctor bills. Torah says that if you
But it's not from here.
what do you
He
mean?
said it's
The pasuk says, and shall he cause him to be thoroughly healed.
Permission is granted doctor.
So from here we derive that permission is granted for doctor to heal.
Got it.
Okay, but the language is that permission is granted for doctor to heal, not command, thou shalt go heal thy neighbor. That does not say. So we're going to see now few different angles of how to understand this statement. So let's begin with the Tosfos. So as you can see on the top, page 2, this Tosfos is in Baba Kama, which is the other citation. We learned from the Gemara in Brachas. This is Baba Kama. I quoted the Gemara Brachas because the other statement of Rabbi Bohu, the other statement of Rabbi Bohu, which says that it's not the way of people to heal, it's just that they become accustomed to do so, but really healing is from God, that statement's going to be quoted later, which is why I read this text. But for now, we're taking on that the ruling is, like Rabbi Shmuel, which says that permission has been granted to doctors to heal. That's what we're taking, that view. Yeah, we're clear? Yeah, clear? So now, it says the Tosfos, where the Gemara quotes the statement elsewhere.
But they're talking about only sickness.
Okay, let's get there. We're going to get to all that. Yes, that's a good point, and that's going to be the main thrust of the Tzitz Eliezer's argument. Let's see. Now, the verse says, Reifa lerapos. From here is granted permission. I'm sorry, the statement of the house of Rabbi Shmuel is like this. Because the pasuk says, V'rape yerape, you shall pay for the doctor's bills if one inflicts pain upon another. So it says Rabbi Shmuel, Mikan, from here, shenitna, that there's been granted permission from Torah, Rishos, L'reifa, to the doctor, L'rapos, to heal. So Tosfos asks, top page 2, why is there need for double language? L'reifa, L'rapos, for the doctor to heal. From here is granted permission for healing. Why the double expression? Or from here is granted permission for medicine. Why the double expression? So says Tosfos, one might have thought that the verse itself is double language. V'rape yerape.
Yeah.
Heal, he shall heal, as in pay the doctor bills. So why heal, he shall heal? Just heal. Pay for the healing. Why heal, he shall heal?
Because there's two elements.
So it's two elements. Because one might have thought that the verse speaks only of healing from human injury. So in other words, God created a man a certain way, and comes somebody else and causes damage. Okay, so the person who caused the damage ruined what God made. So the doctor's now been granted permission to restore the body back to the way that God made it. But illness that comes from heaven, someone might have thought, should not have received medical intervention, lest it appear as though one is undermining the decree of the king. God decided that so-and-so is going to get such and such sickness, and you're coming along and healing? You're undermining God's decree. Therefore, the Torah then comes and says, no, you may do so. That's why the double expression. Because remember, the context of the verse of heal, you shall heal, the context of the verse is where one person damaged somebody else, and the Torah is telling the person who caused the damage, pay for the doctor bills. How does the Torah say so? Heal, you shall heal. So if it only said heal in a singular, you would have thought the healing is limited to when one person inflicts damage on another. Because only in that case, the person who inflicted damage ruined what God made, which is his beautiful body, and now you go heal it and restore it to the way God made it. But if God caused someone to be sick, he's born that way, or God decided the person should hit sickness, one might have argued, you can't intervene, God made it. Therefore, says Tosfos, comes the verse and says, heal, you shall heal. So now we've already expanded the meaning of the permissibility for doctors to heal, which means even if a person is born with an illness, it means God gave him that illness, the Torah is saying you can still heal. You can still send a doctor to heal. Clear? Step 2. Now let's go further. Now here the Gemara has a statement.
Fascinating though, because if that permission wasn't granted, for argument's sake, what would happen?
So the truth is, the Karaites were Jews who didn't believe in the oral tradition, and they rejected this derivation, and they indeed would not go to doctors. If a person got sick, it's because that's what God wants, and that was the end of
Only
it.
if you got hit by a person.
I don't even know if they would do that either.
Why does she tell you?
Oh, so maybe only when a person maybe only when someone gets hit by somebody else, then you pay for the healing. Otherwise, that's right. Otherwise, if God did it, there were those Jews, these Karaites, who would not go to a doctor. We're going to see that Rambam is going to have strong words against them.
Yeah, but according to them, why did it say it twice then? What would they answer?
They don't believe in that whole. They don't believe in this whole extrapolation. Torah says heal, and that's it. Okay. So now,
who was born with a, let's say, with a hole in the heart complete.
in their view,
That,
leave it alone.
None. Let it go.
Let it go. This is what God wanted. Leave it alone. It's God's will.
Exactly what God created.
This is so antithetical to Judaism as we understand it today that you're shocked, understandably. But they're just telling you the logic. In other words, we're going to what's the word? You're going to primary arguments, right? In other words, you're starting with understandings of 2,000 years of study, right? Our axioms are built on 2,000 years of study, but we're going back to like the first. What do they call it? The first causes.
first principle.
First principle arguments, right? So first principle arguments, that's the rule, that's the word. So first principle arguments is God grants permission for healing. So when and how does God grant permission? So one could have argued that only if you ruined what God made, but if God made this sickness, you can't intervene. So says Tosfos, no, that's the whole point of the double expression. To tell you can always heal, even if God is the one who caused the sickness. Okay. Now we have another Gemara, which seems to contradict this, and we have to reconcile these two Gemaras to try to understand what the Gemara is saying.
Nobody was ever.
Can I pass the seltzer, please?
Nobody was ever healed when God caused the plagues.
Pray, ask for a miracle. I don't know. Wait for God to, thank you. Wait for God to heal you.
Who saved the people from COVID?
You're asking now, 3,000 years ago. You were talking about 3,000 years later. Again, we're talking about first principle arguments here. In other words, the practice, we already know what we do, but we're getting to the arguments of how we got to this practice, right?
Very important to have that base.
To understand where it comes from, because we're going to see the limitations of it when we.
Otherwise, they'd be right, the Karaites. I mean, if you think about it, right?
I'm
Who
sure.
give you the right to do anything, to intervene on any level, never mind human beings.
Right.
Anything.
So the truth is,
We're only allowed we're only allowed to check because you said you're going to elevate it.
So
Otherwise, you're not allowed.
that's right. So this argument actually goes back to this idea of tikkun olam, and we're going to veer off it for a second, but I'm going to come right back because again we're arguing on first principle arguments, and whereas the counter arguments I'm hearing are all based on current practice, which is built on the first principle arguments that I'm trying to teach here, right? No, but I just want to make this point here, which is that Judaism as a whole, especially rabbinic Judaism, meaning the Judaism that we learn, is built on this idea that God's world is imperfect and it's human beings' job to perfect it. Right? That's an axiom of Torah thought.
Right.
But it's only an axiom of Torah thought because we all learn Torah. Right? So a Karaite who's not learning half of Torah rejects that whole notion that man's meant to perfect anything. Right?
Because,
Right.
it is what it is.
Exactly.
I got it.
Okay, so far we have that number one, the Torah says to heal, and Tosfos tells us that it means even if God is the one who does the sickness, a person is born with a sickness, or if a person gets a sickness later on in life because God so decreed. Okay, so now we have another Gemara which seems to contradict this principle. This Gemara is in the Gemara in Pesachim 56a. Apropos the people of Jericho who were reprimanded for some of their actions and not reprimanded for others, referring to the Gemara earlier, the Gemara cites a similar braita. Quote, the sages taught King Chizkiah performed 6 actions. King Chizkiah Melech, was one of the better kings the Jewish people had. Actually, the Gemara says elsewhere he could have been the Messiah, but because he failed to sing song praise to God, he wasn't. So he was a king that's super praised. Oh,
Yeah, perfect.
I really wanted to listen to this.
I have a recording going.
Oh, you do?
Yeah, I should. We're happy to have you here. Okay.
Who's the person I was thinking of perfectly exactly?
So here it is. So I want to pass him the text. Okay, so the Gemara says like this. So the sages taught, page 2, King Chizkiah performed 6 actions. With regard to 3 of them, the sages of his generation conceded him, And with regard to 3 of them, the sages did not concede him. So they were happy with 3 things he did, and they were unhappy with other 3 things he did. Due to King Chizkiah's father's wickedness, he dragged the bones of his father Achaz on a bier of ropes and did not afford him the respect due to a king. And the sages conceded him. He ground the copper, right, the sages were happy with that. He ground the copper snake that Moses fashioned in the desert because the Israelites worshipped it, and the sages conceded him. They were happy with what he did. Now here's the third thing, which is interesting. He suppressed the book of cures, and they conceded to him. So Chizkiah went and buried a book that has healing, and the sages were happy. So this seems to contradict what we just said before. We just quoted the Gemara, which says that doctors are meant to do healing, and here the sages are praising Chizkiah for hiding a book of cures.
Well, hold on. First of all, the fact that there's a book of cures already shows.
But he hid it. So you're right. So the fact that there's a book of cures means it's a good thing. But then the fact that he hid it means it's also a good thing. So what's going on? So we have to then understand what exactly was in this book, and that will help us define the limitation, so to speak, on what doctors are meant and meant not to do. Clear? This is what we're doing. This is where we're going.
And I'm saying the fact that the book existed it already shows that you're allowed to heal. If not,
Right. Well, first of all, who wrote this book?
Depends who wrote it.
Who wrote it? Who wrote this book of cures?
You know? Okay.
The Gemara doesn't say anything. It just says he buried the book of cures. He banned the book of cures. No freedom of speech in ancient Israelites. He banned the book of cures, and the sages were happy. Good. So what's the deal? So it says, we're going to go through now 2 ways of thinking about it from 3 sources: Rashi, Rambam, and Ramban. And then once we do that, then we're going to get to the Tzitz Eliezer, because that's going to be the background for the Tzitz Eliezer. So approach number 1 is from Rashi, which shares a similar approach to Ramban. So Rashi writes commenting, and he hit the book, and he hit bottom of page 2, and he hid the book of remedies, as it is written, quote, "I have done what is pleasing and righteous to you." This is the book of Kings. This is Chizkiah speaking. And we said in Brachot, the Gemara in Brachos, that he hid the book of remedies because their minds were not subdued by the illness. Instead, they would be healed instantly. So Rashi is saying that the illness that God inflicted upon these people was meant to bring the humility to their hearts. And because they had the snap your finger medicine, they didn't. The illness didn't do what God wanted the illness to do. Right? So Rashi seems to be saying that there is an objective in illness in and of itself, and the doctor should be held at bay in healing too much, which is why they're happy that Chizkiah hid.
You shouldn't have it.
Yeah, it's a very strange kind of position, right? So what does this mean? That the doctor shouldn't do any healing? Rashi himself didn't go to doctors. I very much doubt that. I'm sure he did. We have the other Gemara which said that a doctor is meant to do healing, right? That's the Gemara said. So in Rashi we see a clear contradiction. We're praising.
Rambam a doctor anyway?
We haven't quoted Rambam yet. Rashi. We'll get to Rambam's position in a moment. Yes, so we're going to get to Rambam's position in a moment. But before we get to Rambam, we have the Gemara itself said, we just read this before. Right. From here, permission was granted for doctors to heal. And the Tosfos we quoted earlier, which said that this includes healing sicknesses that God inflicts, even those you can heal, that Tosfos is Rashi's grandson. Just so happens. But Rashi seems to be saying that the reason why they praised Chizkiah for burying the book of medicine is because the illness was supposed to bring some humility. And these guys were opening the book, getting healed, and the effect of illness didn't have its effect. So it's quite shocking, is it not? It is. Should be. So let's skip page 3, because that's Rambam's position. We're going to come back to that in a moment. And let's go to page 4, which is Ramban. It's a little bit long, but let's read through it so we get the point. Ramban writes like this. This is translation that I got from Sefaria.
This is Ramban?
Ramban with an N. With an N. Nachmanides. Right? Okay. He writes like this. In general, okay, so he's commenting specifically on the curses. It's in Parshas Bechukoisai. Ramban's commentary to Bechukoisai, chapter 21, verse 11. So he's making a general comment about the curses, the blessings and curses that we find in the Torah. And he talks about, like, if we got all these blessings, which seem to be miraculous, then we would be living in a miraculous world. And that's the ideal world, this miraculous state of being. And this is what he says. In general, when Israel is in perfect accord with God, constituting a large number, their affairs are not conducted at all by the natural order of things, neither in connection with themselves, nor in reference to the land, neither collectively nor individually. In other words, the natural order is irrelevant when Jews are doing what they're supposed to. But the majority of Jews are doing what they're supposed to. For God blesses their bread and their water and removes sickness from their midst, so that they do not need a physician and do not have to observe any of the rules of medicine. Just as he said, quote, "For I am eternal that heals you." Exodus 15:26. And so did the righteous ones act at the time when prophecy existed, so that even if a mishap of iniquity overtook them, causing them sickness, because they misbehaved, they did a sins, they got sick. They did not turn to the physicians, but only to the prophets, as was the case with Chizkiah when he was sick. See Isaiah chapter 38. And scripture states of Asa, king of Judah, by way of rebuke, quote, yet in his disease he sought not the eternal, not God, but to the physicians. Now, had the practice of consulting physicians been customary among them, why should the verse mention as a sinful act of Asa's consulting the physicians, since his guilt was only because he did not also seek God? Meaning to say, but the verse can be compared, in other words, meaning to say that really he shouldn't have gone to the doctor at all. So in times of the prophecies, when Jews were doing well, and God's providing miraculous healing, going to doctor is a sin. This is what Ramban is saying. When there's like direct channel to spiritual healing, don't go to doctors.
Right.
Right? Let's skip a little bit so that we don't...
Buy a house in Hampstead if you don't have a doctor.
Say it again?
It's a joke.
So what were the doctors doing in the meantime?
So that's what he's saying, the mistake.
Like you're growing.
Okay, let's see.
When the prophets were
You're
good,
going to the grocery store when there's
that's when
manna
the
from heaven.
majority of people were listening, then they're out of business.
So there was-
Let's skip a little bit.
There was no need for doctors then.
The truth of the matter is, when Mashiach
But
comes,
I don't
we
understand.
don't need
Sorry?
medical intervention at all. Period.
Righteous people get sick all the time.
You have to give it back.
Okay, so let's see.
But that's the idea, is that's the Mashiach goal.
So now let's go to the next page, page 6.
And everything's working, that's the objective.
So this was like a 40
This
years
is
ago.
kind of
Let's go to page 6.
Temple times, it was like that.
Page 6, fourth line. What do you want to say, Yehuda?
Oh, that's it. Righteous people get sick all the time. I mean, this is saying,
Okay, so he said
this is saying
We
that,
don't
that
know
sickness
what-
is a result of.
Sin. So he's saying because the majority, that's what he mentioned before at the beginning, that the majority, in what did he say?
In
Right,
this
but
case,
even in
He said, in general, when Israel is perfect accord with constituting a large number, meaning if the majority of Jews are behaving as they're supposed to, then it works that way. But when the majority of Jews aren't, so like the whole world, so to speak, has been denigrated to a lower level of existence, or the Jewish people have, and that's when sickness exists, and that's when never you have to go to
So
doctors.
even when there are a few righteous amongst
Yeah,
many
they're-
sinners, but the righteous themselves could still
Yeah,
get sick.
yeah, yeah.
Because like you have rabbis that get sick.
Yeah.
It's not.
That's what the Ramban is saying.
But don't forget,
Sorry?
don't forget that God treats the righteous and the tzaddiks in a more harsh
That's
way
also
than
true.
He would with us.
Yeah.
So that's why they would get sick. Maybe they fouled up some.
The main point here is, hold on a second. The main point here is that Ramban is arguing that in an ideal world, doctors don't exist. That's what he's saying. In an ideal world, medicine is never necessary, because if you're sick, you go to the prophet, and the prophet tells you you're sick because XYZ sin, stop your sin, and you'll get healed. That's the ideal world. Let's go to page 6 and go count 1, 2, 3, 4 lines from the top. Page 6, 4 lines from the top, and the fourth last word. This is also the meaning of the saying in Bracha 68. This is the Gemara we read. People should not have to take medications, but they have become accustomed to do so. He quotes Rav Acha. Even though we quoted Rabbi Shmuel, which says that from here is granted permission for the doctor to heal. He quotes the Gemara 2 lines earlier, which is Rav Acha's view, which the Gemara seems to be rejecting, but he still quotes that view and says, our sages taught, referring to Rav Acha and Brachas, that really people shouldn't go to doctors, but they got accustomed to doing so. Okay, so we're going to doctor. But God, you're the one who heals, right? That is to say, says the Ramban, had they not accustomed themselves to taking medicines, people would become sick according to the degree of punishment corresponding to the sin, and would be healed by the will of God. But since they accustomed themselves to going to medications, to medicaments, I'm not sure how to pronounce that word.
Medicaments is another word for
Medicine. God has left them to natural happenings. So you hear what the Ramban just said? Why is it that we need doctors and we have to have medicine? Because we decided to rely on medicine. Because we stopped trusting in God and we decided to start trusting in medicine, that's why we have to use medicine. But if we were staying in a state like they did in the prophets, where they fully trusted God, there'd be no need to go to doctors. You go to a prophet, find out what sin is causing you to be sick, stop that sin, and you'd be healed, over and done with.
Yeah.
So according to that opinion, Rabbi means to say you don't go to a doctor. You go.
So let's see. So the question becomes, what does it mean when the Gemara says that you're supposed to go to a doctor? That from here is granted permission for the doctor to heal. So says the Ramban further. This then is also the intent of the rabbi's expression, Baba Kama 85a. We read it from the Gemara in Brachas, but he's quoting Baba Kama. which says, and he shall cause him to be thoroughly healed, referring to the verse in Exodus, which says that you have to pay for the doctor bills. From here, our sages say, you deduce the principle that permission has been given to the physician to heal. So says the Ramban, and here he says something which is mind-blowing, and all the commentaries, including the Tzitz Eliezer here, begins his whole discussion, which we're not going to read, but he begins his whole discussion opening with like major gasping, I don't want to say shock, but curiosity at the statement we're about to read from the Ramban. He says like this, when the Gemara says that from here is granted permission for doctors to heal, listen to the words. They did not say that permission was given to the sick to be healed by the physician, but instead they stated, by implication, that since the person who became sick comes to the physician to be healed because he has accustomed himself to seeking medical help, and he was not from the congregation of God, whose portion is in life. In other words, because he's a sinner who got used to the notion of going to doctors, and therefore he's coming to you, the physician should not refrain from healing him. But as far as the patient, he should never go to a doctor, because he should be at such a high level where he's connected to God and doesn't need a doctor. So when the Gemara says, from here is granted permission for the doctor to heal, it's an instruction to the doctor, which is why I use the language of permission. If a patient comes to you because he's a sinner who needs a doctor, okay, you're allowed. You don't have to stop. You don't have to let him die. You can go heal him. But the patient wasn't instructed to go to a doctor. This is a mind-blowing statement, which all the commentaries raise their eyebrows. What do you mean? And what's their main argument? The main argument is the Gemara tells us that that saving someone, you have to break Shabbos to save someone. Now, you can't tell me that you have to break Shabbos to save someone because he's doing a sin and coming to you.
Yeah.
And that's if you're breaking Shabbos. Not only that, the Gemara says that if someone dies in a community, and the reason why he dies is because someone next to him didn't call the doctor right away, because he wasn't sure if he's allowed to on Shabbos. The Gemara said, the Halacha says that the rabbi is liable, because the rabbi should teach his community that if someone's life's in danger, you break everything and save him. And you're telling me this is a sinful notion? So we're telling you to break Shabbos, and the culpability on the rabbi for not teaching his community on a sinful notion of going to doctors? Obviously, it's got to be a mitzvah. So what's the Ramban saying? So all the commentaries struggle trying to understand the Ramban, especially since the Ramban himself elsewhere speaks in praise of the necessity of medicine and doctors and breaking Shabbos to save. Right? These are things that Ramban himself, and it seems there are sources that indicate that Ramban himself was a doctor. And we're going to learn soon a statement from Ramban about other doctors. So what exactly is going on here? So most commentaries put it into the context of the following, that what the Ramban is saying is that the ideal world where miracles are normal, that's when a doctor is only granted permission to heal. But because we're in a world where it's not miraculous and we have to live in a natural order, therefore you have to go to a doctor. Right?
You're talking from the patient's point of view.
From everybody's point of view. In other words, what the Ramban says over here, that the patient shouldn't go to the doctor, that's only in a world of miraculous order. When you're living in a world where miraculously people are getting healed left, right, and center by the prophet, because God's providing miracles, and you're going to a doctor, that's a lack of faith. So in that case, the doctor's allowed to heal, because he came to him. But really, he should be going to the prophet. But in a world like ours, where miracles are not in abundance, and we live in a natural world, and we live in a world with sin, go to a doctor, and it's a mitzvah to save someone's life. That's the way people understand the Ramban. But what you do get from the Ramban is that the notion of medicine is not a first case scenario. It's a second case scenario.
Really should believe in Hashem.
Right, it's a second case scenario. And because it's a second case scenario, is the point, that a person can think about it in limited terms. Because it's a question of Torah granting you permission to go to a doctor because the world is in a state that's not perfect, and because Torah gives permission to the doctor to heal, so are there any limitations on that permission? That becomes the angle that Tzitz Eliezer as he approaches the issue of plastic surgery. Clear? Okay, so now, before we get further...
Are there any plastic surgeons in the room at all?
So before we go further, let's go back. So at the beginning I mentioned that today we're looking at the Tzitz Eliezer. So be forewarned, he forbids it. But next week we're going to learn Rabbi Feinstein who permits it.
As long as there's one that permits it.
No, as I said, most permit Rabbi Feinstein. And I also mentioned the limitations on the Tzitz Eliezer. We're going to see the context of the Tzitz Eliezer. We'll see what he has to say. Because I'm not convinced he's forbidding in every single case. Let's see. Yeah, nothing to worry about. Okay, let's go back now to page 3 and here the Rambam's position. Yeah?
So, what if somebody is
Oh,
sick?
wait, I forgot to make a certain point, yeah?
What if somebody is sick in the mind and they go to drown themselves? You don't have to go and save them if you're there.
If someone...
God will save them.
Right, so that's what we learned this morning. That's the foolish wise one, right? Yeah. Okay. So before we get to the
Not
next,
so foolish after all.
before we get to the Rambam's position, which is gonna be beautiful for modern sensibility, the Rambam is gonna talk to us very strongly, and he's gonna ease our minds a little bit. But now let's get back to Rashi. Rashi said that why did they commend Chizkiah for burying the book of healings? Because people weren't taking the illnesses seriously. So now we can understand based on this Ramban. We're talking about the times of Chizkiah, when there were prophets, when miracles were available. That's a time when people shouldn't have been looking at the books of medicine. They should have been going to the prophet and finding out what sin they're doing that's causing them to be sick. So specifically in the era of Chizkiah, that would have been a praiseworthy thing. Today, that would be a terrible thing to hide all medical papers. This is how we have to understand Rashi. Clear? Is that clear? Now let's get to the Rambam's position. And he's going to tell us something entirely different about this book. This book wasn't an ordinary book of medicine, and there's a specific reason why Chizkiah hid it. But ordinary books of medicine must be taught, published, and disseminated. So let's see. Rambam now. Rambam's commentary to the Mishnah,
Yeah, but
which
let's
is...
say all the guys that hold you have to go to a prophet. What's all the halachas with Mechal Shabbos? Everything?
So again, this statement of going to is only in those times when miracles. It's only in those times when miracles were abundant, and we see clearly that prophets healed based on fixing sin. But in an era where we don't live on miracles, you have to go with the natural order, and then it's a mitzvah to save life. Well, saving life was always saving life was always a mitzvah. Saving life was always a mitzvah. But saving life back then was done through a miracle, not through doctor. Right? So the principle of saving life remained. Just the medium of how you save life changed.
Whether you're a sinner or not, you have to save.
That's right. So the principle of saving life always stayed. The question is how you do healing. I actually even saw, just reminding me, I saw a discussion once about whether a person is allowed to be Mechal Shabbos to ask a bracha from a Rebbe. Yeah? If a person's sick, dying, can you pick up a phone and get a bracha from a Rebbe who's going to heal him, saving his life on Shabbos? Does that count? So I don't remember what the conclusion was, but I just remember being intrigued by the discussion to begin with.
That's also a good question at the time of the mitzvah.
So that's why I'm thinking it, because in those days, the principle of saving life always remained. So a guy is sick and dying, could a person run to the prophet on Shabbos, even if it's out of the tchum, let's say, to ask him how to heal his guy?
So they
Maybe.
didn't do anything.
No one's supposed to be from us.
In righteous times, it was 100% spiritual.
It seems-
What is the concept of medicine?
It seems from Ramban, the answer is yeah.
Well, you look when
There
it's
were no remedies, not zero. Like
There's no need for it. So it seemed like when the Jews were in the desert. It seems like a miraculous era. That's what the Ramban seems to be implying.
people got old and got sick.
So they died because they were old and sick. That seemed like, I don't know.
Oh.
Let's see Rambam. Let's see Rambam is going to give us a different angle.
So
But I'm
you
just
have
giving you
to
the other side of the coin.
You have to ask a prophet.
That's what it seems like. I'm going to pass the seltzer, the one that's open there.
Yeah, it's right.
Thank you. So let's see Rambam, and our thoughts will be a little bit more put at ease, because the Rambam is going to speak more to modern sensibilities, if you will.
So you're
Thank
on a
you.
different page. Where are we?
It's 3
Page 3, Rambam's commentary on the Mishnah, which is one of his first works. Every time I read it, to get mind blown, because just to give you context, Rambam was at a young age kicked out of his home in Spain and spent his time running around, and finally made it to Israel, and from there to Morocco, Israel, then finally to Egypt. And somewhere during his travels, he decided to write an Arabic commentary on the entire Mishnah, in which he consolidated all the important elements of Gemara into a commentary that a simpleton can read. That should blow your mind. The guy wasn't even 30 yet or something. You're talking about a brain at a different level. And he wrote a book on medicine at the time too. Oh, and learned to become a doctor while he was traveling too. While he's writing a commentary on the Mishnah. Which, by the way, the 13 principles of faith are written in that commentary to the Mishnah. In Sanhedrin. Just to give you an idea of the mind we're talking about. It's beyond fathomable. Anyway, so let's see. So the Rambam is commentating on this Gemara, which says that they praised Chizkiah for burying the book of healing, which we learned from Rashi, and then we put the Ramban's glasses on that. That Rashi meant that they praised him because the fact that they were getting healing from medicine was ruining them getting healing from the prophets, which is where they should have gone. Okay, so says Rambam, Sefer Refuos, this book of healing, top line after the period
What page?
of page 3 of the source
Back
sheet.
to 3.
Back to 3, yeah. I put it in the wrong order. Ramban should have come before Rambam in the source sheet. So Sefer Refuis, this book of healing, Haya Sefer, it was a book. Shahayanyana Lisrapais, it was a book whose content was to be healed. Bedvarim, through means, Shalohi Tira Torah, which Torah does not permit, Lisrapais Behen. So it wasn't an ordinary book of medicine. It was a book of medicine that contained within it healings that were forbidden by Torah.
It's a magic stuff.
For example, exactly, witchcraft. Kambai, for example, Hadvarim Shechashu Bali Atzodes, these things that those who would create images thought, V'hu, and this is, Ki yesh anashim chachamim b'chachmas hakechavim, there are people who are wise in the wisdom of the stars, that is referring to the constellations, the zodiac, and all that. V'alpiyam, and according to their view, Yasit Surah Le'itim, you would make a certain image at a certain time, an engraven image, which is kind of idol worshipping. V'yiluloi, and this image will heal the person, or will damage him for a certain thing. So it's like a form of witchcraftery. V'zuat Surah, and this imagery, Nikras b'Loshen Yavan, is called in Greek Talasim. Anybody know what that is? Talasim? Tes lamed samach mem. Greek word.
It's not Aramaic.
That's totally different.
Sorry?
It's not Aramaic. I've heard that before.
Is it true you could do these?
It says here it's a Greek. Sorry?
You could really do these things, you get healed?
So it doesn't seem like it works.
Maybe it's amulet.
Amulets by Torah. There are amulets in Torah also, which Rambam himself doesn't speak super highly of amulets on Shabbos. Amulets in Judaism, although he permits certain types on Shabbos because it brings peace of mind, but he's not a big fan of those. But this is talking about things that are forbidden by Torah, making engraven images based on the stars and based on, it's just a form of idol worship essentially.
What's Aramaic for 3?
Plus. That's a tough, lamed, and that's a suf. This is tes and lamed samach. He says it's blush in Yavan. It's in Greek. I don't know Greek. Okay, in ancient Greece, never mind. The Oyman says, the book would say, Kiatsura shi nasas kazu, hatchuna hitayva lochali ploni. An image made in such and such a way is good for such and such a sickness. And such other things that are mistaken. He calls it mistaken. Now, in Mechaber Zah Sefer, this book, when it was authored, was not a mistake, which is why it was around. But it had to be buried, because something changed. So Mechaber Zah Sefer, the author of the Sefer, Loi Chibru, only wrote it, Elo derech hachachma b'teva metzius. He's only describing the matter of fact. This is what these guys believe. But the person who wrote it had no intention that the person reading the book should actually do what it says in the book. He's just describing what exists. And this is permissible.
So why writes to
From here we derive understanding. There are certain things that God forbids us from doing. But it's still permissible to learn them and to understand them. Why? Because God says, you shouldn't learn to do it. And we learned by tradition, and he quotes the source on Sanhedrin, page 68. But you're allowed to learn about them in order to instruct. In other words, what he's referring to is the Beth Din is allowed to study about idol worship to know what constitutes idol worship. So when you're reading a book, let's say when you're reading Jewish law about idol worship, and it says that such and such idol worship is qualified based on such and such behavior. This idol worship is qualified in that behavior. Is that book of Jewish law telling you to go worship that idol? Of course not. It's just telling you what is. And that's what this book of healing was. It was a book of forbidden healings, simply so people should know what is idol worship, what is forbidden, but not so people should read them and use them.
So what's the problem then?
But when people ruin their ways, and they started to use these things as healing, he banned them, the guns and buried them. And that's why they praised him. So from Rambam's view, proper medicine, never a problem, not in times of prophets, not in time today. The problem was only that these were forbidden things. It was idol worship, and it was never meant for healing. It was written only for knowledge's sake, for Jewish law's sake, to know what constitutes forbidden, but not that the people should actually do them. And because people started practicing them, that's why it's like, okay, I got to get rid of this. Okay. Then
There's no proof in that statement. Non-conventional healing of the time.
Right? It was idol worship healing. That's what it seems like.
Doctor, if you know something how to heal the patient, but you're not using it because it's not.
So it must have been unconventional. Yeah, I suppose. That's a different dispute. There's a big dispute if the Torah says not to follow certain people who predict the future. It's a machlokes. Does that mean that the Torah is saying that these guys are talking falsely? Or is Torah saying, even if they're saying the truth, too bad, because when it comes to the future, we rely on God. Right? So I'm not sure where Rambam stands on that question and where he stands on this. Meaning, is he saying that these things worked, but because it's idol worship, you don't do it, and you use other medicine that works?
It says it works. It clearly said it works.
He doesn't say necessarily it works.
Yeah, in the beginning it said it works.
He says, that are mistaken.
No,
Right?
It said it worked.
No. He said that it said in the book it works.
He's
He's quoting what the book would have said. I don't know if he's saying that it actually would have worked. He's saying that that's what
it helped or
the book would have said that this is how it helps. Not that he's saying that it actually did. I'm not sure if where he stands on that question. It's a good question. I don't know.
Yeah, but it meant that the book had to be buried and that it worked for people. No?
Not necessarily. People do all kinds of things that don't work, and they do it anyway, right? You know, if you're a good enough marketer, people do all kinds of things. I don't know. That's a good point, but I don't know for sure. Now Rambam gives another suggestion as to what this book was and why it had to be banned. V'ulayim, perhaps more, says Rambam. Shaya Sefer, this was a book. V'hayasham refuis, and it was a book of medicine, but specifically lisam hamavis. It was antidote to poison that's deathly. What's the word? Poison that kills someone.
Poisonous.
Lethal poison. Yes, thank you. Lethal poison. It was healing for lethal poison. And this book would have said like this: Sam hamavis pliny, such and such lethal poison. You grind it up and prepare it as such. And you drink it as such. And the symptoms will be such and such. And the way to heal such and such is with such and such. That's what the book would have said. Now, what was the point of the book? If a doctor saw such and such symptoms, so he knew from the book that this such and such symptoms comes from such and such lethal poison. So he knows that the person was given to drink such and such poison. And he would give the person the healing that the book says to give against such and such a poison. So the book described poisons, symptoms, and medicines. So the doctor knows if he sees such symptoms, it comes from such and such poison, and gives such and such a remedy. But then, so it's a good book. Sorry?
It's tricking the system.
So it's fine, says Rambam, that's perfectly fine. But when people started to misbehave, people use the book not for healing, but to poison each other.
Right.
So his Svarim Vagons, and he said, let's get rid of these books. So maybe he left the healing part, but he got rid of the books that describe the poisons because people were using it to kill each other. So option 2 as to what it was. All the point being that Rambam is avoiding the notion that that medicine is inherently a problem, even in time of prophecy. This is what Rambam is clearly trying to do.
So the Jews could have sold them the Sefer water.
Yeah. Now it says Rambam, and this is the beautiful part. This is something that we're going to understand, and this is going to talk to some of the principles you were mentioning earlier. I elaborated on this subject, in this matter, because I've heard, and this is how people explain this to me. This is how people explain this Gemara. Shlomo wrote a book of healing. This is King Solomon. This is what he was told, and this is why he's elaborating, because he doesn't want people to learn this mistaken way. And this is the mistaken way. That King Solomon wrote a book of healing. When any person gets sick, or any sickness happens, from whatever sicknesses exist, he would investigate in that book. He would do exactly what it says in that book. And would immediately get healed. When Chizkiah saw that people were stopped relying on God because of the book, he took away the book and hid it. It seems like he's referring to Rashi. It sounds like he's referring to Rashi's explanation. Rashi doesn't mention anything about King Shlomo Melech, but Rashi makes the same. Sorry?
It's a different book, though.
He said, the reason why I'm elaborating, giving 2 different explanations to what this book might have been, is because I saw another way of reading the Gemara, and that way of reading the Gemara is completely wrong. And he's going to explain why it's wrong. What was the wrong way of reading the Gemara? That Shlomo Melech wrote a book of medicine.
Right.
And Chizkiah saw that because of the book of medicine, people stopped relying on God. And therefore he got rid of the book. This sounds very much like Rashi's explanation. Even though Rashi doesn't mention that King Shlomo Melech wrote any book, but Rashi does say that the reason why Chizkiah took the book away was because people stopped relying on prophets for miracles. Ramban Rashi's pshat. And the Rambam is going to reject it entirely. And it says that the reason why I just elaborated on this whole thing is because I want you not to learn the way these guys are learning. So we see a split in how we understand medicine. Rashi and Ramban saying, ideal world, miracle. Okay, in Nabach we don't live in a world of miracles, so we got to have doctors. And Rambam is about to tell us, no. The system of doctors is the miracle that God provided, as we're going to see what he's about to say.
So biased, Rambam.
So Rambam was also a doctor. Rambam was a doctor, but so is Ramban. They were both doctors, interestingly. Rambam is more famous as a doctor because he wrote medical books, but Ramban, is a number of places it says that he was a doctor.
So they're both biased.
Even though Ramban said that the doctor is a second case scenario, right? But look, the Gemara, we can't get away from the fact that the Gemara says permission was granted for the doctor to heal. That's clear in the Gemara. You can't get away from that. If there's limitations on that is the question, right? Mm-hmm. Okay, so let's see. Va'ata shemeya. Now listen to me, says Ramban. Hampstead zeh hamaimer. The loss of this way of thinking. Mashayesh b'min shegyonis, and what kind of mistakes there are. Ve'ech yachsu l'chizkiyahu. Why would they assume about Chizkiyahu? Minai velas of this foolishness. Masha'ein ro'el yachas. Simple people, masses, should not be making such a mistake of thinking that you don't go to doctors. And why would you say that Chizkiah thought that way? Right? And like others who agree with Chizkiah, or in this mistaken version. And in this weak-minded and foolish way of thinking, are you telling me, says Rambam, when a person is starving, and goes to eat of a slice of bread. And I'll go eat it. He goes to a piece of bread and eats it. This person will no doubt be healed from the great sickness called hunger. So you don't go to doctors, but you're going to eat bread? God inflicted hunger on you. What are you eating for? He's saying the same thing. Hashem created people that they get hungry and they have to eat. Hashem created people that they get sick and they have to go to doctors. What's your problem? Right? He says, in Cain, if so, you're telling him that because he's going to eat bread, therefore he's abandoning and not relying on God? So what do we tell these fools? We'll tell these fools, you foolish ones. Just like you thank God when you're about to eat. Thank God for providing food that heals me. I'm removed by hunger. And I'll live and be sustained. So too you should thank Lord to God, which brought forth for me a healing that will heal my healing when I take that medicine. So he treats medicine the way everybody else treats food.
Yeah, but when one is hungry, it's a different thing from when Hashem inflicts illness on you. It is the same thing. I'm not seeing the problem.
What he's saying is that both sickness and hunger are a rule of nature God embedded in the world. And God embedded in the world downsides, and he created opposite to it upsides. So the downside of hunger is you have food. The upside of hunger is that you have food to provide for you. And sorry? What's the difference if it's daily, or if it's monthly, or if it's weekly? It's a matter of principle. The point he's making is that Hashem creates humans, that we are needy of the world around us. We need food, and we need doctors.
And all the
Finished.
And everybody gets sick no matter how
we
healthy and how...
have to be able to handle both perspectives, right?
I know, but
So
they don't think
Ramban actually agrees with this principle. He agrees that you have to go to doctors. But in his mind, it's only because we're sinners. And we have no choice. But Rambam is saying that this is to begin with the way it's supposed to be.
The argument is not that it's exactly what you're saying. It's the medium. God created sickness, but the argument is that the cure is not the doctor. The cure is not sinning, being in a righteous time.
Right, but in Ramban's view, now they shouldn't go to a doctor.
Similarly, if someone is hungry, the only cure to that is food. Versus when someone is sick, there are two options. There's either you're a righteous person, and therefore you don't need a doctor, or you're a sinner and you need a doctor. So
Okay, that's a good counter argument. Maybe that's Ramban's position. That's a very good counter argument. That's a very good counter argument.
it's different.
Good counter argument.
Even in
He's
the time of the Beit HaMikdash, they ate.
right. So yeah, good point.
They always ate.
Yeah.
Even in the Midbar.
No, the thing is that there's no solution to hunger other than food.
exactly.
Versus
And there's no solution now.
the solution to sickness, there are.
Solution-
If you're a doctor,
right.
if you're a sinner, or if you're
You know,
at
it's-
this time you have God.
In theory, there's another solution to sickness, which is to zoom backwards in time to prophet time and get healed. Whereas hunger, you have no other option but to eat, because even in temple times you had to eat. Good point. But Rambam would argue that even in temple times they went to doctors. That's what Rambam would argue. People always went. Yeah, Rambam never mentions anything about not going to doctors in temple times. He would have said you would have gone to doctors then also.
Whose position is it
The
that
Torah
there
said
are no
that
doctors in temple times?
Ramban,
Only the
which is
Ramban.
saying, and Rashi seems to be also be saying that, because Rashi said that he was praised for putting the book away because they should have.
Historically, though, during the times of the Beit HaMikdash, were there I don't
It
know
seems like there were doctors, but they were right. Asa was admonished for going to a doctor, not relying on God. Right?
Mm-hmm.
That's what we quoted earlier. Asa was the king. Asa. No, Ramban quoted Asa, which quoted scripture which admonishes Asa for not relying on God, right, and for going to the doctor. So Ramban argued because he should have gone to the doctor, and Rambam might argue that he didn't just like you're supposed to thank God when you eat bread, he didn't thank God when he had the healing. Maybe that's the issue, right? That would be the subtlety between Rambam and Ramban there. But scripture definitely tells off Asa for not relying on God and going to a doctor. Okay, so now that we have all this background, let's look at the Tzitz Eliezer. Okay, let's try. We have 2 pages, and I hope we can get through all this.
Doctors in Chumash time, whether these
We might have to continue this next week. Sorry.
As a king also, and things like that, maybe you should have been higher.
Maybe also, yeah. Who knows? But from one second. But from Rambam's perspective, king or not king, kings also have to eat, right? So kings have to eat, so kings also have to go to doctors, right? He makes them both the same. Okay, so let's see. So now this responsa, we're looking from the Tzitz Eliezer now, volume 11, Siman, section 41. We're only looking at the last 2 subsections, Ches and Tes, of this Siman, this Teshuva, this responsa. But most of the response is actually dedicated to trying to understand and make sense of the Ramban. Trying to make sense of the Ramban, who himself was a doctor, who says that you should be relying on miracles and not on doctors. Trying to make sense of that Ramban. And he quotes a bunch of sources and 100 sources and this and back and forth, and he basically says what I said earlier, which is, in a theoretical world where everything's miraculous, we wouldn't have to go to doctors. Right? That's what I
still have to eat.
Right, so that was the argument that Yehuda is making. But again, that's Rambam's position and Ramban's position.
Right.
Okay, so now he says like this. Now he comes at the end of all this, he comes to the question of cosmetic surgery, and he comes from a very interesting angle. So let's see.
Where are you?
In the text, not the source sheet, but this text, the Tzitz Eliezer, top right.
Oh, okay.
Ubiyosi bezeh hanoi le'enyin ba'arach hashuva. Hinu le'enyin ba'arach hashuva negel ma'isa. Now, since I'm on this topic of the question of doctors and healing, I'm going to address an issue which is important, a practical application. Dine besifri Ramas Rachel, in my book called Ramas Rachel, Sham there, v'chein b'simin Aleph, as likewise earlier in this responsa, hivesi shittas Rishonim, Poskim, I've brought the various different opinions of the earlier scholars and the different halachic decisors, Barashush senitna le'israpos, with respect to what permission has been granted to use medicine for healing. Hivesi, I quoted Noisil Adas Ramban, in addition to the Ramban's position, which we read earlier. I also quoted Deis Chavis Lavavis, also Rashi's position, Bebrachas Daf Yud Psachim Daf Nun Vav, Ulamasam, and opposite, on the other side of the coin, of Ramban and Rashi, who say that going to doctors is not the best case scenario. I also quoted Dasa Rambam Zal, Rambam's position, the Pirish and Mishnah is the Psachim, to his commentary on Psachim, which we just read, where he's on the other side of the coin, which says going to a doctor is just like eating a slice of bread. After parentheses. V'chein Hivesi, I also quoted Dasa Ibn Ezra, the opinion of the Ibn Ezra, the Rabbeinu B'chaya and the Rabbeinu B'chaya ala Torah, Shesavi, they're of the view, and this is a very interesting position. L'chalik bein makas ha'adam, right? This is a position that's opposite to Tosfos, which says to make a distinction between sickness inflicted by man, the bein makas Hashem, between and sickness inflicted by God. So they say if it's inflicted by God, you don't heal, right? Whereas Tosfos said even if it's inflicted by God, you do heal. Right? This is the other view. As well, they distinguish between a visible malady, where you can see on the outside of the body the malady, to a malady that's in the inside of the body which you can't see. And see a book called Tzitz Eliezer from the Gra, the famous Vilna Gaon. He gives citation. Shadaita, that his view is Gamkin K'das Even Ezra. The Vilna Gaon follows the opinion of Ibn Ezra. The Masha Darshu V'Rapa Yerapa, that which our sages say from the verse which says, "You shall pay for the healing." Mikan, from here, from here we derive that a doctor is granted permission to heal. This is only for exposed malady that you can see on the exterior of the body, which is visibly available to see. Okay, so the reason why they say that this is because.
Is that
Okay, let's see in a minute why.
Yeah, someone wounded you, that, or
So there was one opinion that distinguished between if someone wounds you versus the wounding that comes from God, a sickness from God, whereas Tosfos rejected that, right? Tosfos says that the double expression is to tell you that even if God gets you sick, you can still go get healing, right? So there's this dispute about that too.
Could that be the Soros?
Tsaras is a spiritual malady, not a physical malady. We're talking about here physical malady. Okay. Kamoike likewise, so it seems like the Vilna Gaon, which is only a couple hundred years ago, he's of the view that internal sickness, one cannot go to a doctor. That's what it seems like. And the reason you're going to see soon is because internal medicine, it's like they're fishing in the dark. Whereas today, we're not fishing in the dark. I would assume the Vilna Gaon would agree that because, in other words, you're going to see that the reason why we distinguish between external sickness versus internal sickness. No, internal sickness means internal organs.
Right.
Internal bleeding, God forbid. So why should we distinguish between external sickness or internal sickness? So presumably, as we'll see soon, at least for some, the reason is because internal sickness, they're fishing in the dark. And they're going to cut your body open, not knowing what they're going to find. But today, where we have x-rays, you know what's going on, I would imagine the same law applies as external medicine, as we'll see. Unless there's some other reasoning why they would split between internal and external. Either way, the halacha is, we go to doctors for everything, as we're going to see. Okay. Kamoikain, likewise, I've also quoted earlier, which again we didn't read it. Das Habach, B'Torah Yodei Simin Shimon Lamav, the opinion of the Bach, the Bayis Chadash, She'echriya, who concludes, following Tosfos' view, Shamutter Lidish B'Reifim, one may seek out the advice of doctors, Afila B'Maka Ba'al Dei Shemayim, even if it's a sickness that God inflicted. Umeid V'Kaisev, and the Bach testifies and writes, She'kach Nogu B'Chol Gvul Yisrael. This is the practice of all Jews everywhere. So which means the Bach lived a few hundred years ago. Even in his time already, it's been accepted across the board. All Jews go to doctors for all issues, whether God inflicted the malady or whether man inflicted the malady. Sefer Mata Moshe, I also quoted in the name of a book called Mata Moshe, Shemaichiach Gamkin, who also proves not to follow the view of the Ibn Ezra and the Vilna Gaon, meaning to say not to exclude any issues, but rather go to doctor for everything. And that the world, the Jewish people, have not followed their view. A person should not prevent himself from any medicine. And that which the Gemara said, that permission is granted to doctors to heal, refers to all forms of medicine. Whether they're internal organs, whether they're external organs. And moreover, and this expression, permission was granted to the doctors, reshus to mitzvahu. It's a permission to fulfill a mitzvah, which is an interesting expression. Why the Gemara uses the expression that it's permission is granted. So according to the Ramban, we have a very simple explanation for why permission is granted. Because the world no longer has miracles, okay, so we're giving permission for doctors to heal. But since we're saying now, like Rambam, that all medicine and you're supposed to, and so on and so forth, why is it called a reshus? Is a good question. Where did I read? I read somewhere that reshus means like this. We read it in Chavis Lavavis. That all, in the commentary there, all healing comes from God. So the moment God gives permission for someone to be the agent of healing, he's now commanded to be that agent. Right? So the command comes as a result of the permission. Right? God grants the doctor permission to heal, and if God grants him permission to be the agent of healing, then he has to be that agent. That's the way of understanding it. Okay.
And it's incumbent upon him to use
to
it.
do exactly, because he's been granted that permission. Right. So that's why there's this expression. So I also quoted a book called Teshuva Ma'ava. This is all the Tzitz Eliezer speaking. Shekaisav Nami, who also writes Poskim that the opinion of most halachic decisors is not like the Ibn Ezra, who differentiates between internal organs and external organs. It's been granted permission of the one eternal living one, God, l'roifa, for the doctors, l'rapai, to heal kol choli, any sickness, v'chol maka, and any affliction, bein shel cholol, bein she'enu shel cholol, whether it's internal or external, meaning in the inside of the body or the outside of the body. Yu'un Shem Barichis, see there in my other book at length where I explain this.
Cholel means
Okay,
hollow, no?
sorry?
Cholel doesn't mean hollow.
Cholel means like on the inside of the hollow. I think it means on the inside of the body.
So this is completely the other way, that you're 100%.
So this whole thing is based on the background here, and telling us the conclusion is like Rambam, and that there's no distinction between any form of healing. You always go to a doctor. We went through all this to get the background to the conclusion here. Now let's see how he gets. So having established this framework, because this is the angle of which he comes from. Because again, as I mentioned at the beginning, Rabbi Feinstein is going to come from the question of, are you allowed to damage yourself, and to what degree are you allowed to self-inflict pain? That's going to be Rabbi Feinstein's angle next week. But the Tzitz Eliezer's angle is, Torah gives permission to doctors to heal. Okay, are there any limitations on that? So we expanded the definition. One could in theory say the limitation is only if other men cause and inflict pain. We could in theory say the limitation is only when people are sinners. We couldn't say in theory say the limitation is only on external organs. And now we're discovering, no, that there's all sickness is allowed. One's allowed to go to a doctor. But are there still any limitations? And the Tzitz Eliezer is going to say, yes, there is.
An internal sickness, is it also psychological?
I would say yes. In Rambam's position for sure, because Rambam writes in Hilchos Deis, he discusses proper, being a balanced person, and talks about going there for sure, but definitely in his book called Shemona Prakim. Rambam writes an 8-chapter introduction to Pirkei Avos. It's called Shemona Prakim, the book of 8 chapters, and there he goes at length about what it means to be a balanced individual, and there he explicitly talks about going to doctors who can help you get balanced in your mind. So Rambam certainly would agree with that.
And what if that occurs through surgery?
Sorry?
And what if that occurs through surgery?
I don't see why it would be different.
No, so I'm saying, so it applies.
Yeah? Yeah, I would think internal organs, he means here literally internal organs, but I imagine the same thing applies psychologically, certainly in Rambam's view, for sure.
Okay.
He talks about going to Roifei HaNefesh, doctors of the soul, doctors of the psyche. Rambam talks about that.
There's also a series on the Shemona Prakim that you did.
Yes, we once did a series on that, yeah.
Shameless plug.
Yeah.
But it seems like now from this whole explanation we have, I kind of understand more the approach of Rabbi Feinstein.
You do or don't?
I do.
That you should be allowed to do cosmetic
No,
surgery.
because the question is a different question. It has nothing to do with doctors right now. If you're talking about plastic surgery,
So let's see.
it could be a mechanic. Like we termed it as a doctor who does that, but it's nothing to do with
So let's see.
Yeah,
Which is exactly why the Tzitz Eliezer is going to say it's outside of the purview of what a doctor's allowed to do.
Yeah, but if you're saying that those procedures, for instance, cure, let's say, mental ailments, then
Okay, so that's what I mentioned at the beginning. If it's a question of, this is purely for self-beautification. Let's hear the language he uses. Because if there's in any way, shape, or form, any medical benefit, then even the Tzitz Eliezer, I imagine, is permissible. Let's see the language, because we're going to see clearly it's permissible even like that. I mentioned earlier, like my niece had a cleft palate. Technically speaking, she's fine, but she took a plastic surgery to fix that. Because a girl growing up like that, it's going to be huge.
She can't feed, she can't waking. No,
Right, there's lots of.
same thing.
Okay, or God forbid, an extra finger, or someone who,
But
right,
for sure, a cleft is.
or someone who was in an accident who's completely healed, but now his face is deformed.
That's different.
This is serious psychological damage, right? I imagine that counts as healing. I would go out on a limb and say it counts as healing, but let's see the language he uses here, and we'll see specifically what it's referring to. He's referring to a certain type, and we'll see. Let's see. Okay, now v'hine. We're going to see something even more. We're going to see something even more incredible. I was surprised to see, says the Tzitz Eliezer, the Sefer in a book called Shaalos U'Teshuvos, written by a rabbi named Pennett, Rabbi Pennett. He writes, citation Chelek Yodesim Kufim Gimel, on the last paragraph on the right hand side, on the second line. After he quotes the famous teachings of the Rambam in his commentary on the Mishnah, the Perek Makom Shenogu, in the chapter Makom Shenogu which we read earlier, he writes, the Shai Tzedek quotes the Rambam, who says that one who does not want to go to doctors, for any malady or any sickness, Rahman God forbid. And Rambam said, this is like someone who's hungry, and doesn't want to eat, but that certainly, he thinks he's not going to die of hunger. So, Shai Tzedek quotes that Rambam, meaning he's taking the view of Rambam, which says you do go to a doctor for healing just like you would eat. This book called Shai Tzedek. V'chein das in Ibn Ezra. And he also quotes the opinion of the Ibn Ezra, which we quoted earlier. The Ibn Ezra's opinion is that when the Gemara says that permission is granted for doctors to heal, this is only external organs. But internal organs, they don't know them. They're like a blind person going through a marsh. So that's why I said earlier, the reason why those who say not to do internal organ medicine is because we're going blind. Which again, we rejected that opinion anyway. But I'm guessing that with today's x-rays and whatnot, even the opinions which forbade back in the day doing internal organ medicine would agree that you could do it today. Because again, the problem is you're shooting in the dark blind. And you're cutting a guy open without knowing what's going to happen. Better leave him alone. Okay, fine. But that's not the point. Okay, so after quoting all that, says the Tzitz Eliezer, the Sha'arei Tzedek now says the following. Moisef HaKoisef, the Sha'arei Tzedek now says and writes, V'zel L'shen, and this is a quote. And this is going to be mind-blowing. Lanias daiti, in my view, kol ma shenitna toider l'shus l'rapos, when we say that Torah grants permission to heal, afilu l'shittis Ramban zal niskala il, even the Rambam's view, who Rambam compares going to a doctor just compares it to eating a slice of bread. The most permissive and expansive of all the views we quoted. Even according to him, says the Sha'arei Tzedek, hainu kol choli v'kol makla, this is any sickness or malady, asher neshava achakach, which came about later, shaloi noidakach, that we didn't know about it. Rak b'tiva b'zayelach, rak b'tivoi, only by nature it came about that this happened to him later in life. Yelach it's already for that place, and then he goes to the doctor to heal him. But when we come to a thing which a person was born a certain way, b'tiva mileda, a person is created a certain way by nature from birth, the ein by shum chayli v'ka'ev klal, and he has no sickness or pain. So if he has sickness or pain, even if he's born that way, you can heal. But so a person is born a certain way, no sickness, no pain, and he wants to go to a doctor, not because he needs to get healed, he's not sick, not because he wants to get away pain, he has no pain. But he wants to be more perfected. What kind of example is there? A person who's healthy but wants to be more perfect and go to a doctor. This is mind-blowing. Going, for example, Isha Zu, this woman, which is the question that the Sha'arei Tzedek is addressing, a woman, who's not sick at all. The number la, but she went to a doctor telling the doctor that the doctor should heal him, should heal her, that she should be able to give birth. She's asking for healing of infertility. Even though her going to the doctor is not because she's in pain or because she's sick, but rather she just happens to not be getting pregnant. I don't know, says the Sha'arei Tzedek, who gave permission from Torah law for perspective for someone to go to a doctor to ask for help for infertility. Boom. Right? He began by saying, Hine haloim. I was surprised to read this. Could you imagine? This is what the Sha'arei Tzedek says, that a woman cannot go to a doctor to ask for infertility treatment because there's no pain, there's no sickness, you were born this way, leave it.
Yeah, but
shocking.
I think the question is the definition of sickness. Because in someone who's infertile, usually most of the time it's secondary to something else. So
is that really right?
Well, yeah, a lot of the times they have, for example, like polycystic ovarian syndrome, or they have other things, and then you cure that, and then they're able to.
I hear.
So they're not sick. They're not sick in the sense that
it hurts.
The way we understand sickness.
Right.
They don't have a broken leg or anything, but their ovaries aren't functioning normally.
Right, which means something's wrong. Okay, so let's
wrong with the body.
let's give a hypothetical where nothing's wrong except for she can't get pregnant. A hypothetical. He would say not to.
Yeah, so
right?
back then,
which is
so back then,
I don't know when he lived, Pennant. I don't think he's very.
Whatever it was before.
He's within a century. He's within a century.
Before advances,
right.
Then there was nothing wrong.
Right.
There's nothing they knew that was wrong. But as time advances, we'll learn more and more, and then we'll say, well, there is something wrong, and there's something that we can intervene.
Yeah, I hear.
So the definition of sickness fluctuates.
Okay. Yeah, I hear that. But let's just take his theoretical, just to make us see his arguments. Okay, now says the Shaalos U'Teshuvos. Now says the Tzitz Eliezer in the bottom. Last paragraph on the bottom right. Something very important was taught to us by the Sha'arei Tzedek with respect to understanding the qualification of permission that's been granted to doctors to heal. Granted, when it comes to the issue of healing someone who's infertile, which is the case he is talking about, it seems in my humble opinion, says the Tzitz Eliezer, the Dvar of the Choyim, his words are to be disregarded. Because there is, in the matter of pregnancy, there's value in sustaining humanity. God didn't create the world for, the verse says that God didn't create the world for vanity, for like emptiness. Right. Rather, God created the world to be filled. So first of all, just that alone is enough of a reason to go heal her. So she's not technically sick and not in pain. What are you saying? The whole world runs on having children. So every woman has the right to do so, to be part of the process of having children, and therefore certainly his words, what he says about not treating infertility, disregard, definitely treat infertility.
But
reason number one is because that's what the world is built on, having children. Yeah, what do you say?
But isn't that like what does a doctor have to do with infertility? Isn't that?
What do you mean? Doctors deal with infertility all the time. All the time. It's one of the major things.
Yeah, but I mean, like,
so let's get back. The sickness is also from Hashem, right? This is the whole point.
Try different things.
That's why we went to this. That's why we went to this whole background to understand that Hashem made us hungry.
Right.
He gave us food. He made us imperfect. He gave us doctors.
Right.
Right? So the woman, God forbid, was born imperfect. You can't have children. Go to a doctor and get it fixed. Because this is how the world operates. This is what the Tzitz Eliezer is arguing. Don't tell me because she's born that way she can't be healed.
No, I'm not saying it can't be healed.
Right?
I'm just saying in that particular example.
Exactly.
And there's different.
You
can do the opposite. If to stop having children, you go see a doctor. But to
get pregnant, yes, absolutely run to a doctor. If God forbid someone's suffering from infertility, absolutely go to a doctor. There's Jewish organizations that will take care of you from top to bottom to make sure you can have children. If God forbid that becomes an issue,
like IVF and these things,
all kinds of things. And actually, the Tzitz Eliezer is at the forefront. He's very well known for medical ethic issues. I just should point out that it's very interesting that he's the one, as we're going to learn, that forbids the cosmetic surgery. Because when it comes to other medical issues, he has very broad shoulders and is very bold and permissive in a lot of areas. On transgender issues, on abortion issues, on all kinds of issues like that. He's one of the few rabbis to come out against smoking as a halachic ruling. He's very bold in keeping hearing aids on Shabbos. But here he's not permissive, which is interesting. Okay, let's see. So number one, the reason why I'm rejecting the Shari Tzedek as regard to the issue of infertility is because this is how the world operates. It's meant to have, the world is built and created by God to have children, and therefore she deserves to be part of that too. The Gam likewise, Mishum Chizir Ba'aleim, because of the husbands that come back to her, Ba'asiyas Ma'amtzim Lakimis Peruvu, and provide opportunities and put efforts into helping them fulfill the commandment to have children. Im Nisheseyam, with their wives. What he's referring to is like this. By Jewish law, technically speaking, if a woman doesn't give birth after a certain amount of time, the husband's allowed to divorce her so that he can fulfill the command to have children, assuming that the problem is her body. It's 10 years, right? But this guy wants to stay with his wife, and he wants to fulfill the mitzvah of having children. So put all the effort to make sure to do so, because he wants to have it with his wife. His soul feels connected to her. The kashem like part of it. It's difficult for them to separate.
So it's not like you have to.
Mishum kach mitam. Sorry?
It's not like you have to. It's just an option.
So the halacha used to be you have to. Nowadays we're more permissive and we allow people to stay married, even so. So he's saying this guy who wants to be married to her and he wants to have children with her, put every effort to make sure that happens. And the custom of Jews for all the generations will prove my point. It's been a rampant custom to seek out doctors or disakaras for issues of infertility. Even if they have no pain and even if they know of no illness. And amongst these people who went to doctors for infertility questions are great scholars and sages.
So,
okay, we'll stop over here, and next week we'll continue. He's going to make further arguments that prove that one may and should go to a doctor for infertility treatment, but he's going to tell us that what we do derive from here is that if there's no need at all, then you can't go to then the doctor doesn't have, then it's out of the purview of doctor's permission. And what was the basis of the Shari Tzedek's argument? Why is he saying not to go to the doctor for infertility treatment? Because he's saying from here is granted permission for the doctor to heal, meaning there's a sickness the doctor has to heal. If there's no sickness, stand back. So in the Shari Tzedek's view, infertility is not a sickness, so stand back. So Tzitz Eliezer says, okay, when it comes to infertility, that counts as an issue that needs to be dealt with, right? But if you're going to something that has literally no value medically speaking, then it's outside the purview of doctor's permission. You have no permission to inflict to do body modification.
Why is that connected to doctors? That's what I don't understand.
Why is it connected to doctors?
According to this,
They don't have permission.
Because a person is forbidden because body modification is forbidden by Torah. Right?
Okay, but not because
Like-
of the problem of going to a doctor.
No, so the reason why these people are convincing themselves that it's permissible is because it's doctors that are doing it, right? So
We call them doctors today, but it's not.
that's the point. So he's saying you don't have permission to do that because it's outside the purview of the permission the doctor's been granted. If you can't do
Same way
it,
as I can't go for a tattoo, for example.
exactly,
Nothing to do with doctors.
exactly. So if there's a medical need, necessity, and I would argue even psychological medical need, then definitely do it, just like every other medicine. But if it's
So it's purely subjective, pretty much.
so that's the thing. It becomes very subjective. Yeah.
I mean, there's no who decides.
We're going to see the language. The language he uses, we'll see next week, is he speaks to people who are.
I agree with that actually. I mean, the question is the following: if you perceive that there's no, if you perceive there's no value to it at all,
Yeah.
then of course you shouldn't do it.
Yeah.
But who attributes value is the question.
Right. So he's going to talk to women. He speaks to women specifically who are going after he refers to people following
I actually agree with that.
He's,
There's no value, then of
he's
course
talking about fashionable reasons. He's like, stop following the fashion, stop following the trend. Just because all your friends are getting surgery, you also have to get surgery. That's outside the purview of what you're allowed to do. So that's why I said that after the conclusion, even though at the face of it, the Tzitz Eliezer and Moshe are arguing, but I think at the end, not necessarily they're going to be arguing because they're coming from different angles. The Tzitz Eliezer is coming from the angle of what's the obligation of a doctor? The obligation of a doctor is to heal. You're not healing. Stay away from the body, right? And Moshe is going to come from a different angle. And the case he specifically talks about, as we'll see next week, is a girl who has a hard time with shidduchim because of her looks. So she wants this,
I've seen that.
and then that's the case where he's permissive. But the language he comes from is because a person's not. We're gonna learn that a person's not allowed to self-inflict pain. But if the self-inflicting of pain might bring a certain gain later, then he may be allowed to. And there's all kinds of qualifications of exactly what is the gain that comes later that a person's allowed to put himself through pain. So we're going to see. And that's going to be Rabbi Feinstein's argument. So I don't know if at the end of the day, the scenario that the Tzitz Eliezer is talking about is exactly opposed to the scenario of Rabbi Feinstein, even though they're making different arguments. You follow? So let's see.
Mention plastic surgery or just
He mentions specifically plastic surgery.
mentioned it?
Yeah, you can look at the bottom. And to your point, if you want to look at the last paragraph, he says there,
So it's up to the practitioner.
he says there, Nituchim plastian, and then he puts in parentheses, Ima filu nikir b'shem lerapos. If we can even call this doctor shaft, like doctoring, he puts that in quotations like this. We'll see next week. So he's specifically talking about a very specific scenario, which is why I don't think necessarily the Tzitz Eliezer and Rabbi Feinstein are arguing, even though they make very, very opposing points. So God willing,
Well, they probably agree with each other more than anything.
That's what I think.
And all the Tzitz Eliezer
That's
is
right.
saying is that if there's no added value.
so this is what happens very often. This
I
what
don't
hap-
think you can argue
That's how
with
you
it.
phrase the question to the rabbi.
Un-
That's the
un- no.
regular answer to the whole thing.
Unfortunately, what happens is, a lot of times what happens is, it happens in modern science also, where you don't look at the original study, you just quote everybody else is quoting the study, right? Instead of reading the actual full study. So what happens a lot of times is, you search an article on cosmetic surgery, and you see, Tzitz Eliezer forbids citation, and Rabbi Feinstein permits citation. But then when you start to read what they say, the context, and how they said it, not necessarily they're arguing, and that's what I think is correct. That's what I think is correct.
And I think it's hard to argue with what the Tzitz Eliezer is saying.
I-
All
I-
he's saying is that if there's no added value, you shouldn't do it.
And you're just following a trend, don't do it. That's basically what he's going to be saying, and we'll see next week. And then we'll see Rabbi Feinstein's argument the other way, which is permissive. And again, I don't think they're arguing.
Ask him. For them, there is a problem. That's why they feel it's.
Yeah. He also talks. Rabbi Feinstein also talks about diets. He talks about diets. If diets cause you pain, are you allowed to take a diet? I mean, everything he gets into.
I like that approach of what he's saying because it's not connected. It's not connected to the fuah. It's connected to.
That's right. That's right. If it's outside of the purview of doctors, you can't. That's right. That's what he's arguing. Yeah. Yeah. But it all comes from the fact. This is why I did the whole background, because it all comes from the fact. In other words, if the premise is doctors do whatever they want. Okay, a doctor comes and tells you to practice surgery. That if the guy has got a PhD at the end of his letter and it says doctor before his name, from Torah's perspective, it comes from the fact that Torah grants permission for healing. So what's the permission Torah grants? Torah grants healing. If it's not healing, don't do it.
Makes sense.
Understand? That's why I went through this whole background. So God willing, next week we'll continue and further and
That's what
further.
we learn, actually, we learn the same opinion. Like for us, like the rules are technically, like the official rules at least are, you're supposed to screen every patient.
Yeah.
And if they fall under certain categories, you're not allowed to operate on them.
Interesting. So I said earlier at the beginning that if someone
That's the official rule. Does it happen in practice?
right. So I said at the beginning that if someone wants to get feels their self-confidence is going to go up if they raise their cheekbone level, then before they see a plastic surgeon they should see a therapist. Because if that's the issue here, is self-confidence issue, I think you're addressing the wrong problem by fixing your cheekbones, right? And I think that's what he's addressing more. Not directly, but indirectly, I think that's what he's addressing.
It's a good argument.
Yeah.
Right?
Because what if
He doesn't say see a therapist, but it seems like that's the kind of thing he's talking about. And I would argue, see a therapist first if the person's suffering from self-confidence.
then it
Not
could be
the...
a reaction.
Sorry?
It could be a change. It could start with the cheekbones, and then it could be the ears, and it could be the lips, and it could be the.
So some might say, good. So just till they put you in, you want to make sure you have a beautiful body that goes to the grave, right? It's very important. And I'm being sarcastic, but that's the attitude of many. Well, why not do it? That's why it's here.
For some people, though,
Right.
who are really tormented, and I
So-
don't think there's any therapy that would help them.
So so then now you have a medical benefit already. If a person goes to therapy, and the therapy's not helping, and the therapist says, look, the only thing to do is to fix the body.
Yeah.
So then now you have medical benefit already, and I don't think that Tzitz Eliezer would say no anymore. You understand? That's why I think that once you come from you
But
see
in
the
the real world, you can't tell people. I guess you could, but in the real world, you don't tell people.
see a therapist first.
Therapy,
I don't know why. It depends what they're asking for. I don't know why not. Like,
because it's a free world.
oh, people can do it if they want, obviously. But I'm saying, if someone came to me as a
But
rabbi
then
for advice,
yeah.
should I do this?
Yeah.
My first advice would be, please talk to a therapist and deal with whatever
Right.
self-confidence issues you're dealing with, whatever the issues are at your...
But I'm saying from the practitioner's perspective, like you could get sued if you tell someone.
Right.
Like someone comes.
Yeah,
and
so this is
says,
a theoretical law.
"I get a breast
Yeah.
augmentation," and your response is, "Well, you should go see a therapist."
yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Doesn't.
Okay.
You have a great joke.
Next week,
Very
God willing.
interesting.
Yeah, well, that's it.
Yeah, thank you.
Have a good night.
Good night.